Well, I'm super pumped about our Counting to Christ theme that we have this year, and I've kind of advertised this, but we hadn't gotten to the big ones yet. We're to the big ones now, the big numbers, and I'm telling you, that's where it really starts to get fun. And so we have the number 1,000 under consideration today and for this month, and in doing that, I want to break this down into its significant biblical factors. So we're going to factor the number 1,000, but in a biblical sort of way. Now, if you look at a number like this and it ends in 0, one of the first things you teach, a number that ends in 0 is always divisible, by the number 10. And so we can take 10 into 1,000, and you can know how many 10s there are in 1,000 by the number of zeros that appear in the numeral. And so in doing that, to make 1,000 and to factor that in a biblical way, this is what's called expanded form. You have 10 times 10 times 10. But you could write this in another form also. You could put this in exponential form, meaning how many 10s I possess is 10 to the third power. So you have 3 10s multiplied together to make the number 1,000. And here's why this is biblically relevant, and it checks out always in Scripture. So we have 2 significant numbers that you find when broken down, 1,000, and that's the number 10 and the number 3 that's used as an exponent, or if you prefer, 3 appearances of the number 10. So we've established that the number 10 is the number of completeness, and of course the number 3 is the divine number. So every time 1,000 is used in Scripture, it has something to do with completeness and also with divinity. That's why the number 1,000 is used for complete periods of divine time. We're going to open up God's Word together, both electronically, visually, and feel free to in your own grasp also, in Psalm 105. And we're going to read from there verses 7 and 8. Psalm 105 starting in verse 7. And here the inspired songwriter pens, He, talking of God, of course, Yahweh, He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. He remembers His covenant forever. It's the word which He commanded for 1,000 generations. I got accused last week of hating on my wife. And so I'm not going to, it's unjust for sure. So I'm not going to pick on my wife until I pick on myself. And so I'll tell on myself first, and I'll mention this about you. And I hate to admit this, but sometimes I'm a little forgetful. I think I get too many tasks that I allow myself to pile up in a day, and I don't always take the time to write all of those down, which a wise person ought to do, and I forget them. Case in point, last week, we teachers were supposed to gather up schoolwork for a student who's going to be missing for a period of time. And so I got that work together. I set it on my desk. I even took the time in red pen to write the student's name, top right in the slot on all of these papers. I was supposed to drop them off with the administrator before I left. And so, in the midst of doing all the teaching in the day and putting out 400 fires and keeping about 15 more from starting and other things that were taking place, making sure the kids got their candy, all the important things, I get up from my desk and I'm thinking, job well done, week well done, hopefully. And I'm looking around and there's nothing left I see to do. I'm looking at my desk where the papers are thinking there's nothing left to do, but I know there's something that's undone. It's the worst feeling in the world. And so I say, well, what else can I do but everything that's supposed to be done? And so I turn around, I go home and thinking, job well done, good day, good week. And 2 hours later, I get a text from an administrator, hey, you have any work to give to this student? I said, I most certainly do. Would you mind to be so kind as to go into my room, and on the desk, I have the names written. I just forgot to drop that off before I left. The day before I had returned home, I was thinking, well, hopefully, job well done, moving on to the next task. And I get home, and Vanessa says, our internet hasn't been working since this morning. Okay. All right. So I thought, I know what I have to do. She said, I've already unplugged the modem and plugged it back in 2 different times. I was impressed by that. So that's the way of going about it. First thing is try to fix it yourself. That didn't work. I said, you know what? I don't have the time, but I'm going to call our internet company and tell them what the issue is. After 30 minutes spent on the phone, all the settings had been redone, network reset. She said, okay, now just go to your modem and unplug it and plug it back in. I said, all right, done this 1,000 times. And so I go upstairs and go to unplug it, and our electronic modem is not plugged into the electricity. I said, you know what? I appreciate all your help. I think I found what our issue is. Vanessa forgot to plug the modem back in, and could you believe that it wasn't working? Now, to her credit, she had unplugged it once and plugged it back in and unplugged it, but then she forgot to plug it back in, and we still did have a hiccup or two after. So to her credit, the point being this, we forget things that need to be done, a lot of times important things, and it's not because they're insignificant to us. We just have so many other things going on, we'll fail to recall something important that needs to take place. One of the things I love about God that sets Him so apart from us is that He never forgets a single task that needs to be, and He especially never forgets the agreement that He has with His people to bless and to benefit them. We're told that He remembers the word of His covenant forever. And then it's renamed by saying He does so for 1,000 generations. Well, wait a minute. A generation's only about 25 years, and 25 times 1,000 gives you 25,000 years. How in the world would 1,000 generations correlate with forever? Not literally, but in its meaning, the numbers 10 and 3, to God, 1,000 generations is a complete 10 period of divine 3 time, and that's why to Him the concept would mean forever. And we need to be able to connect that in the Bible, not only Old Testament, but as well New. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, "But beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." There have been attempts to take this statement and to say, well, that means that for every one day, that is 1,000 years. But that can't be the case, because we're also told that 1,000 years is one day, and that would be a contradiction of terms if that's the case. There is an important word, and it's "as" in that statement, which insinuates in language that is a figure of speech. Not literal, but it's figurative language, and specifically, as many of you know, it's a simile. It's a comparison that's using like or as, and for a good reason. Now, if you had 1,000 years, do you think you might be able to get a few things done? Sometimes I feel like I need 1,000 years to accomplish A, B, C, and D all the way through Z, and then start over at double A, down through double Z, and to get all of these things done. If you had 1,000 years, how many roofing projects do you think you could accomplish? If a person had 1,000 years, Kenny, he's not with us this morning, I wonder how many hospitals Kenny could build in 1,000 years. Okay, now that being said, how many major roofing projects, Heath, can you accomplish in one day? Oh, how many hospitals can Kenny build in 1 year, and his team? How many things could you do in your job in just one day compared to 1,000 years? See, 1,000 years, we need that type of time, or at least a lot more than just one day. We can't do a whole lot in a day. Many of you look outside and you say the season is fall. I disagree with you. I say the season is leaf season. There's a big difference between the two. And in our yard, some of you have seen it, we have so many oak trees. We don't have, it's like 1.8 acres, but it is covered in large, mature oak trees. And in fall, I mean, it's like this, you're swimming through the leaves. And we've tried, Vanessa and I, raking and blowing those leaves and disposing of them. We can't do it all in one day. We've tried. It takes us 2 good days and then a whole month to recoup our breathing from everything that we've inhaled from that. After 2 years of this, we finally decided, this is a year we're biting the bullet and we are paying professionally for this to be done. It's not worth our lungs any longer. We can't even rake and blow and dispose of all of our leaves in one day. Big projects, what can you do in one day from start to finish? And then you compare that to God, and He can create an entire universe just in one day. You can't roof a big building in one day. You can't build a hospital in one day. I can't take care of my leaves in one day. God can put a universe into place in one day. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? What God can do, don't forget, with Him, one day is as 1,000 years. It's not one day is 1,000 years. Why would the number 1,000 be used? To Him, one day, that's good enough. That is a complete 10 period of divine time. That's all I need to do anything that I wish to do is the connotation that's behind it. The number 1,000 shows up when people are giving gifts for the Divine One. And that can be done either directly to him or indirectly through his people. But before we look at some instances of this, I want to kind of set this up with why it makes a lot of sense. And to do that, we're going to read from verse 10 of Psalm 50. In the 50th Psalm, and the 10th verse, this statement is made concerning God. He speaking, "For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills." Well, why on 1,000 hills? As a boy, I had a friend whose parents owned the sale barn in Mountain Grove, and I thought that was a really cool thing. We showed up there a few times and got to run around and play when sales weren't going on. And it was difficult for me to take in because we had about 10 to 15 head of cattle. And this thing was just full of animals. And I thought, wow, that's amazing that one couple, one family is in control of, they don't own, but they're in control of all the animals found in this barn. And then I got a little bit older and I learned something much more mesmerizing than that there is one entity who not just is in control of, but actually has full ownership of every animal that's on the entire planet. And he's in control of all the sale barns that you find on the planet. And it's stated of him, "Every beast is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills." But I'm sure there are a lot more than 1,000 hills located on planet Earth, so you just get to 1,000 and then it stops there? No, it's figurative in its meaning. And it's stating that he has complete 10 ownership. Who? 3, or the Divine One, over all the land and over all the animals that live on it. And here's how that ties into the gifts that are presented to him. This starts all the way back involving the patriarch Abraham in Genesis chapter 20. And of course, the patriarchs, including Abraham, they kind of roam around from place to place. They're a little bit nomadic. And they enter into this location called Gerar. And Abraham, the great man of faith, has a slight absence of it early in his life. And you can understand why. He has this beautiful wife, and her name is Sarah. And he thinks that when outsiders see her, they're going to want her as their own bride. And I don't want to die because of her. That's a little bit selfish, isn't it? He says, I want to survive. And so Sarah, he consults with his wife. He says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell people the truth that you're my sister. It's half-sister, sister nonetheless. We're going to tell people that you're my sister, and we will divulge no more information than that. We'll just leave it at that spot. Well, they come into this land of Gerar, and the king of the territory, his name is Abimelech. He sees this beautiful lady, and he says, I'd like to have her. Just like Abraham's suspicion would be the case. And he takes her, sets her aside, and says, this is going to be my bride. Well, God shows up to him in a dream at night, and he says, you, my friend, are a dead man because you have another man's wife that you're holding for your own. He says, whoa, I didn't know. And God says, I know, and that's why you're still breathing. I didn't kill you because in your innocence, you didn't realize what's going on. But he says, this man is a prophet. Here's what you're going to do. You will take this woman and return her to her rightful husband, and he will pray for you, and I won't kill you. What do you think about that arrangement? Yeah, sounds great. And so verse 16, to Sarah, the king of Gerar, Abimelech, says, behold, I have given your brother, which might be a little bit of a slap in the face, your husband, your brother, 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, we know this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody. Thus she was rebuked, and other translations would say something, she was redeemed, or along those lines, which may be the meaning. I didn't mention this problem that was taking place in Gerar. They knew something was off because their women stopped conceiving and bearing children. And so they recognized there was some type of divine curse that had been placed on them. But this curse was lifted through the prayer of Abraham for them, as well as this gift that is given to God through him of 1,000 pieces of silver. And the divine mind says, that's enough. I will accept that. Vindication has transpired because it is a complete 10 offering for the 3, the divine one. 1 Chronicles chapter 29, there's another king, and we like him a lot more. His name is David, the second king of Israel. And this is late in his reign. Actually, the reins of the kingdom are being transferred to his son in this process, Solomon. And 1 Chronicles chapter 29 and verse 20, in this great assembly that's been convened, David says to all the people who are present, "Now bless the Lord your God." Verse 21, and they made sacrifices to the Lord. They offered burnt offerings to the Lord. And notice how many in exactness. 1,000 bulls, 1,000 rams, and 1,000 lambs with their drink offering and sacrifices in abundance for all Israel. Why 1,000 though? A complete 10 offering for the divine being 3. And notice how many sets of 1,000 in particular are found. But just to reiterate for whom this really is, 3 1,000s are present. Well, as the narrative continues to unfold and Solomon actually possesses the kingdom for himself, his first major act, we're familiar with this, but we don't talk about the numbers much involved. 2 Chronicles chapter 1 verse 6, and Solomon went up to the bronze altar that stood before the Lord where the sacrifices were made at the tabernacle of meeting, and he offered 1,000 burnt offerings on it. Now where do you think he had learned that? But from Dad, as his reign ends and he turns the reins over to his son Solomon, he gives to God a complete 10 divine 3 offering of 1,000. And we're going to get to this in just a little bit, but I want to foreshadow it with verse 7. On that night, God appeared to Solomon, and he said to him, "Ask, what shall I give you?" And we know what the response from the Divine One is going to be. The Divine One 3 is going to give to his servant Solomon a complete 10 gift of wisdom, more than anyone who had ever lived, more than any king who would come after him on the earth. But here's why. Because Solomon prior had offered a complete 10 offering to the divine 3 being, so God responds in like suit. I want to consider one more king who lived. This one's Hezekiah, a few hundred years later. And Hezekiah is well known for the sweeping reforms, bless you, for the sweeping reforms that take place within worship. He reinstitutes the genuine adoration from God according to the law of Moses. And one of these things is re-implementing the Passover feast. Chapter 30 of 2 Chronicles, verse 24, we're told that Hezekiah, king of Judah, gave to the assembly 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep. The leaders gave to the assembly 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep. Verse 27, the priests, the Levites, blessed the people. Their prayer came up to his holy dwelling place, the divine one, to heaven. In verse 26, there was great joy in Jerusalem that hadn't taken place since the time of Solomon. There had been nothing like this that had occurred in Jerusalem. And we see those same numbers appearing by way of 1,000, of 10, and of 3. But then we have another number that's introduced here. Notice 1,000 bulls, 10,000 sheep, 1,000 bulls, but also 7,000. 7 is brought into the conversation. And you have this great response from heaven with the numbers of 10, 3, 10 again, and also 7. A complete, perfect offering had been given to the 3, the divine one. Therefore, in response, you have a complete 10 blessing that comes upon God's people by the 3, Lord himself. And that's the third way that we find 1,000 being used in the Bible. This is a neat reference. In Numbers chapter 35, in verses 4 and 5, this is an instruction that's provided for the Levites. You have the 12 sons of Jacob and the tribes and their land allotments, the provinces that are assigned to them. But you'll find one missing on the maps that you consult. Which of the sons of Jacob is missing on that map, the sons of Israel? But the Levites. You don't find Levi written on any tribal allotment. And here's the purpose behind it. They weren't ever given, a vicinity, a location, a region like in the Ozarks. They weren't ever given anything like that. They were, however, given a number of cities that they would enjoy. I'm going to show those to you on the map in just a moment. And it's stated this in the prescribing of it. You don't get a spot, this territory that's enclosed like others are receiving. And here's why. Because the Lord, you get something better. The Lord is your inheritance. They perform the religious ceremonies of God's people, and they have an extra special blessing because of it. Verses 4 and 5, Numbers 35. The common land of the cities which you shall give the Levites is to extend from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits all around. In addition to this, you shall measure outside the city on the east side, 2,000 cubits. On the south side, 2,000 cubits. On the west side, 2,000 cubits. On the north side, 2,000 cubits. And then the city shall be in the middle. When it's all said and done, you have 48 cities that are given to the Levites, 6 of which are the famed cities of refuge. And in all of these, you're going to have more or less what is the town square. But then you're going to have an area that extends outwards, still city limits, you might see it as, where the people are going to dwell. And that's going to be 1,000 cubits in every direction. But then you're going to have additional pasture land that goes outside of that, another 2,000 cubits. And so the math equation that you have is this: 2,000 cubits plus 1,000 cubits. And what does that equal in each direction that's going out? But in terms of thousands, 3,000s. Remember what was promised to the Levites. No, you don't have this nice and close territory like everybody else has, but the Lord, or the Divine One, is your inheritance. And then in thousands, they're given the number 3 that they get to receive, probably symbolizing the connection that they get to have with God. And here's where things get even more fascinating. This 3,000 cubits is to extend to the north, to the south, to the east, and to the west. And so it's going in all 4 directions. And I think that's important for 2 reasons, mathematically. Number 1, you take that 3,000 cubits, and let's just talk in terms of thousands. You take the 3 and you multiply it by the 4, and what do you get? That's the number 12. I know we haven't arrived at that spot yet, but the number 12 is the religious number of the Bible. You have this group of people who are performing the religious, or the 12 duties of God's people, and they have as an inheritance something that is divine, 3 sent from the Lord. But in terms of thousands, you also have the number 10 showing up, a complete provision that's made for them. And one more that we need to discuss right here. It goes in 4 directions. What's the number 4 in Scripture? But the earthly number. And so what you have is a complete blessing, 10, that's sent by the divine, 3, for those who are performing the religious, 12, duties of God's people, a complete inheritance that they get to enjoy for His servants on the earth, the number 4. Every one of them makes perfect sense. Deuteronomy chapter 1, this remark is made by Moses, and is actually reflecting in the second giving of the law all the way back more toward when the law was given the first time. But verses 10 and 11 of Deuteronomy 1, the Lord your God has multiplied you, He tells the people. And here you are today, just like He said to Abraham, as stars of the heaven and multitude. May the Lord God of your fathers make you 1,000 times more numerous than you are, and bless you as He has multiplied you 1,000 more than the amenities you already enjoy. And that God would continue to do for His people. There comes a certain spot in Solomon's reign where Israel really reaches the zenith of her power. And it's said that silver, which is one of the most precious elements even back then, as it is today, but even more so than what it is today, that the precious metal silver was so abundant in Israel that it was as common as finding rocks as you walked along. Raise your hand if you've been in Israel, the actual country, if you've stepped foot in Israel. Okay, well, that's okay. We're all experts because we've seen the pictures. So let's talk about it as fellow experts with one another. Israel's a pretty rocky place. It's a little hotter, a little more arid because of its location and proximity to the equator. But in a lot of ways, it's like the Ozarks and the hills and the streams and different things like that you see. And it's also a whole lot like the Ozarks and all the rocks that are all over the place. Now, we are a wealthy people in America, and you could argue maybe the wealthiest people it has ever been. I don't know, though. Could it ever be said in America that silver is just like rocks on the hillsides of the Ozarks? I mean, these people were so pampered. And it has to do with this promise that was made to them. May God bless you 1,000 times more, or receive even more of a complete gift from Him, 3, the Divine One, than what you've already experienced. So this is in the Bible what 1,000 meant for the people of God. And as we wind things up, I want us to bring it a little closer to home and ask, okay, but what does 1,000 mean to me today? Even though this is still in the Old Testament. Isaiah chapter 60 is in a section of messianic promise, meaning it's fast forwarding to New Testament times, which is our age. And this promise through the Old Testament is often called the messianic prophet, is made to you and me. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 22, a little one shall become 1,000, and a small one, a strong nation. Why is that? I, the Lord, the three, or the divine one, will hasten it. I will cause it to occur in its time. And back in the biblical span, we see this beginning to transpire with Abraham, who's not just grandpa age. He's great-grandpa age. In fact, he's age of a dead man. And that's when he finally has his first child. And just like God foretold, not just through a great-grandpa, but through a man that was almost dead, he has all these children, and they come from him. And that matters to us. Because we are promised in Galatians chapter 3 that whenever we make the decision to belong to Jesus and He accepts us and adopts us into His family, the Christ came through Abraham, and that connects us to Abraham and all the promises that God made to him. So when through faith and immersion we enter into Christ, into His body, we're connected to all of these blessings, and we, as what originally was a small one, become a great one in the spiritual family of Christ. Now, we look at the Lord's church today and we see millions, and it's huge. It's a big nation, right? But you go back originally, and there was just one, and relatively speaking, a small one. It was a human being, granted as a divine being also, but it was a human being who started this, and there was only one, and he gets 12, and then he gets a number of others, 70 and 120, and it kind of just keeps expanding from there, and eventually explodes into this monstrous nation of millions plus. We are a part of this promise that was made, a complete 10 blessing through the 3, the divine one, or the small one has become the figurative 1,000. I've been looking forward to getting to this passage that Parker read a little bit earlier. Don's been reading the book of Ezekiel, and he's told me several times over the last few weeks, man, this thing, it's tough. I agree with him, it's tough. I told him, I said, Don, that book is Revelation on steroids, is what Ezekiel is. It's more than 2 times its length, and oh man, it is packed with all this figurative language, apocalyptic writing. Well, let's just look at a little bit from this. Ezekiel's a lot like Isaiah, and actually you can look at Revelation, some similarity that's found in it. He's anticipating the Messianic age. He's looking at our time in this vision that he receives. In Ezekiel 47, verses 1 through 5, he says, the messenger brings me back to the door of the temple, and I see water flowing. And it's so much, it's like overflowing. And then the man goes out with a line in his hand, he starts measuring, and he goes out 1,000 cubits, and he says the water, by the time we get out there, it's like wading out into the ocean. He says the water came up to my ankles after 1,000 cubits. And he measured again 1,000 cubits, and then the water came up to my knees. And he measured again 1,000 cubits, and the water came up to my waist. And he measured again 1,000 cubits, and the water is so expansive. He says, I'd have had to be swimming to go any further than that. And then see if this strikes a chord with you, verse 12. Along the bank of the river will grow all kinds of trees used for food. Their leaves will not wither, their fruit will not fail. They'll bear fruit every month. You get a chance, I don't have it on the screen, you get a chance, turn to Revelation chapter 22 and look at the first several verses that's mentioned about the blessings of God's people today as we move forward into eternity. That's what it's talking about, the age in which you and I live and all the benefits that are found in the temple of God. But the temple is some Old Testament concept. So how would that apply to us? Reread 1 Corinthians 3 and 6 and find out what it is that you and I are today. But the neo-temple of God as the church, the house of our Lord Jesus Christ that He constructed. And the number 1,000 is broken down into 2 significant digits. 10 and 3, but like before, these overflow, deep blessings extend in all 4 directions. So what do all of these numbers in this passage tell us? But that God has prepared for His people today a complete 10 blessing by His own hand, that of the Divine One, 3. And it's for His servants, even as they live on the earth, the number 4. That's what 1,000 means to you and me today. And that's really nice to hear because we're living in a time that's kind of rough, let's be honest. After the last 3 months, and no matter how you look at it, whether it's religiously or politically or socially, things are challenging on God's people right now. We had a study, about a year or so ago, about rebuilding the walls of our congregation, and that's a process that's well underway and that will continue to be the case. Well, we look back to this instance where the walls of God's people were down. It had been a very difficult stretch for them, not for a few years, but for about 100 years. But God's people go back and they rebuild His temple, and they need to be able to fortify the walls around it to protect their progress. And so verse 13 of Nehemiah 3 says they did just that. They built the wall, and they hung its doors with its bolts and its bars, and they repaired the number used 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the refuse gate. Why not 999 cubits or 1,001? Why exactly the number 1,000? Well, we go just a little bit further in chapter 6 and verse 16, it becomes a little bit clearer. The scribe of God states, "And it happened when all our enemies heard of it and our accomplishments, and all the nations around us saw these things, that they were very disheartened in their own eyes, for they perceived what we already knew, that this work had actually been accomplished by our 3, or by our Divine One." And what they realized is that complete 10 blessing had been provided by the Divine 3 hand to His servants on the earth 4 in all directions as they had been encircled, and the enemies knew they had no chance. As we're trying to still navigate through a time that's difficult, and we see a lot of things, including spiritually, walls have come down. We're trying to repair those walls. We need to seek the one blessing, and we continue to do so, that makes all the difference in the world. Not to let our trust fade for just a second, not to allow our passion and our enthusiasm to go away, but for it to remain strongly behind. And as we offer our complete 10 gift to the 3, the Divine One, we will see just as Solomon in return, not because we deserve it, but because He's so incredible. We will see a complete 10 blessing coming down upon us from the Divine 3-1 to you and I, His servants that are on the earth 4, and there will be nothing to stand in our way to stop us. That's when we belong to Jesus' family. We become connected to Abraham, our father of faith, and the example that he has put forward for us. God knows that His church, united in and around, trusting in Him, is unstoppable. And so that's what He desires for every one of us to do. That's why He has convened meetings like these every Lord's Day, so that in our mistakes we can get closer to the Divine One, and His blessing can continue to overflow into our lives. And the many mistakes that we make, James chapter 5, verse 16, when we're around one another, we can confess our trespasses to one another. We can pray for one another so that we can receive complete 10 blessing by the Divine 3-1, and 1,000 is relived in our lives over and over again. The blessings, the waters of God's mercy continues to overflow from the temple into our lives. You allow that water yet to flow into your life so that you can become a part of the Abrahamic promise and the family of Jesus through adoption. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 13 says, "It's by one Spirit." That, by the way, is the Divine One, or 3. By one Spirit, we've all been baptized into one body. That's complete, or 10 blessing, by which we've all been made to drink into one Spirit. It doesn't matter if we're rich or if we're poor, if we're white, we're black, or we're brown. If we're American, if we're non-American, if we're male, if we're female, if we're young, we're old, or we're anywhere in between on these things, we're all one body in complete blessing by the Lord Himself. Yes, the number 1,000's pretty neat in the Bible, but it's the number 1,000 that means everything for us today. And if you would like to receive blessing from the divine three-hand in its completeness, 10, as God has promised you, on the earth, the number 4, now's the time to do that for His amazing grace to be received into your life and for your spiritual chains to be let loose. Come and receive that if we can help you while we stand.